Hello, my treasures. The new mini set for Festival of Legends Audiopocalypse has been revealed. And with it, the return of a dual class cards, which are actually one of my favorite mechanics to Hearthstone. And I am a little bit sad that we're seeing this in a mini set instead of a major set. This mini set will release next Tuesday, which means the content on this channel is going to get a little bit funky on the order of it, and I'll keep you all updated. So let's begin with the cards revealed and the new mechanics that have been revealed. The first one is going to be remix cards, which are cards that will swap between different effects on each individual turn while they sit in your hand. Very similar to the hero power for Dr. Boom, if you remember that hero card. The first one revealed of this type of card is going to be for Warrior, which is a 2-cost weapon with 2 attack, 2 durability that swaps between having a battle cry of giving itself +2 attack, giving yourself 5 armor, giving it a cleave effect, and finally allowing you to discover a taunt minion. All 4 of these effects actually feel incredibly strong for a 2-cost card. However, because not all of these effects support the exact same deck, the consistency factor of using this card in a wide variety of decks is probably going to be hurt, because you're not always going to get the effect that you most want, and most of the time you're probably just going to slam this down whenever you do draw into it. Though a lot of decks are probably going to want to use either the discoverability tool or the ability to give it additional attack, depending on if you're playing an aggro deck or a control deck. And speaking of a really powerful taunt minion for Warrior, first a dual class pair has been revealed, which is going to be Demon Hunter and Warrior. 2 classes that are on the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to meta relevance right now. This first card is going to be Abyssal Basis, which is a 7-cost 4 attack 7 HP demon with taunt and lifesteal that costs 2 less for each weapon you've equipped this game. So this should in theory work with things like Sword Eater or the 1 minion in Demon Hunter that equips a random weapon whenever your weapon is destroyed, thus making this card actually quite usable in my opinion. And because Menagerie Warrior is the main deck that most people are playing when it comes to Warrior as a class, having a really powerful demon, which is a tribe that Warrior doesn't normally have access to, could make this card incredibly playable in that class. And now for the other Demon Hunter Warrior card, which is through Fell and Flames, a 0-cost Fell spell that gives a minion rush, finale, and +1/+1. Have we learned nothing that giving Demon Hunter or any class a 0-cost spell is incredibly deadly, especially with Lady Cynthia? I would be shocked if that card actually makes it out of this mini set without seeing some type of nerf. This is just a really good card to support that card in particular, as it'll allow you to buff up and thus do more damage to your opponent's face every time you do cast an additional spell. And the really annoying thing about this card only has a Fell spell as its tag. It would be interesting if maybe they made it where it was Fell for Demon Hunter but Fire for Warrior. I know that would make it a little less consistent and you'd have to have like 2 copies of it in the collection or something. But I do think that would be something that could make it a lot more playable in Warrior. I just don't see a place in Warrior currently where giving a minion a rush is enough to want you to run a card like this. And because Warrior doesn't have really any advantages of using a 0-cost spell that I can think of right now, I think much like the previous card where that's only going to be good in Warrior, this one is probably only going to be good in Demon Hunter. All right, let's get into the neutral cards, starting off with one that is a grand finale for the finale keyword, Elite Tauren Champion, a 5-cost 5 HP 5 attack neutral minion with the finale. Start a rock duel. Players must spend all their mana each turn or they take 8 or more damage. This is the token that is generated in the hand whenever you do play this card down. And because this is a finale instead of a battle cry, you will always have this swap to your opponent's hand and should in theory do 10 damage on the first round, depending on where this actually starts. We don't have any gameplay footage to showcase how it does start, but this should be an interesting card to play around with, as it is a build around card that we've been kind of missing since the new rotation. The other plus side about a card like this is it fits in some already existing decks pretty easily, such as Curse Warlock, where this is basically just a really, really big curse. It also does help counteract some of the aggro decks where you're going to force your opponent to overextend on a turn so they don't take a bunch of damage. The only thing I could see that's going to be a bit annoying with this card is trying to combo it with other cards so you can use multiple copies on the same turn. But this is probably the healthier way for a card like this to actually exist. Now, the Festival of Legends has kept up all the Grim Totems and the Thousand Needles. So here we are with their leader, Magatha, Bane of Music, which is a 5-cost neutral legendary with 5 attack, 5 HP, that has the battle cry, draw 5 cards, give your opponent any spells that were drawn. So at first glance, this was one of those cards that I didn't think would be that good. However, then I thought about a lot of the aggro decks that currently do exist in Standard Hearthstone that don't actually run too many spells within them and rely on spell generating minions if they do need additional spells. This could shift some of those decks to play even more of those spell generating minions instead of running any spells in their deck, while also replacing a lot of the spells that most of those decks use, which were draw power cards, as this will allow you to refill your hand for 5 mana, which is really, really good. This isn't going to fit in a lot of like combo decks or control decks where you're relying more on spells, but aggro, I think this is the perfect card for, much like how the previous card is more for combo or control. It fits the theme of these being the enemies of each other, and I can't wait to play around with these two legendaries. And now for the next card, which is a blast from the past, Speaker Stomper, a 4-cost tradable minion with 4 attack, 4 HP, that has the battle cry. Enemy spells cost 2 more next turn. Lotheb, is that you? It's been so long since we've had you in Standard. This is basically just a better Lotheb. Sure, aggro matchups, you're not going to be able to get this card's battle cry off that often. However, stat line, this card is actually pretty strong and it does have the tradable effects, so you can just put it back into your deck if you're in a matchup where this isn't going to matter. Overall, I think this card will probably see a lot of play, especially in aggro decks, because it is a 4-cost card. I'm actually kind of shocked it's a 4-cost card because this is an effect that I would assume would be on a 5-cost or a 6-cost, very similar to Lotheb. It kind of is sad that after all these years, Lotheb has finally been dethroned by a rare card, though. Now for the next card, which is going to be Grim Totem Buzzkill, a 4-cost, 5 attack, 4 HP minion with Battle Cry. Discard a weapon, draw 3 cards. I don't think there's any classes in this game that has enough weapons for this card to see much play. I think Warrior is the closest to having the critical mass of weapons to use this card with. However, because it doesn't have any type of tribal tag on it, Menagerie decks are probably not going to want to run this, and they can just run something like Light of the Phoenix instead, which doesn't require them to have a weapon in their hand to discard. If we saw some weird, wacky weapon for Warlock that got its effect when it's actually discarded, then this card might have potential. But as it currently stands, given the fact that we only have seen the neutral cards and some of the Demon Hunter Warrior cards, I don't think this one will see any play at all, even if it does have a pretty decent stat. Now for the next card, which is going to be Remix Musician, which is a 3-cost, 3 attack, 3 HP neutral minion with Rush that gains an extra effect in your hand that changes each turn. These are the 4 different effects: Poisonous, Lifesteal, Divine Shield, Wind Fairy. As a 3-cost minion, all 4 of these abilities aren't really that bad. They are a little bit boring in my opinion, but this card does serve as early game removal tools for a lot of classes that might not normally have access to, and it does allow you to replace any early game removal spells, so you can use something like Magatha or let's say Rogue in particular. But given that they chose 4 of the best keywords that you could have with Rush, I do think this will maybe see a little bit play, even if you can't buff it up or do something else with it. All right, now let's go over a combination I never expected to see, which is Death Knight and Hunter. The first card revealed for this combo is going to be Hollowed Hound, a 6-cost, 3 attack, 6 HP undead beast with Lifesteal, Rush, and also damages minions next to whoever this attacks. So my first thought is, Menagerie Death Knight might be a deck now. We do have a really good beast. We do have a lot of hand buffing tools, which makes this even more powerful in such a deck. And this does increase the survivability of Hunter if you do want a more control style of Hunter deck in theory. Though I don't know if you're going to want to hurt the consistency factor in Hunter, where you're going to get a bunch of King Crushes to finish off your opponent. So overall, outside of week 1 decks in Hunter, I don't expect this card to see too much play, though in Death Knight it does have a lot of possibilities, as it does give a tribe that Death Knight didn't really have too much access to. Now for the next card, which is going to be Yelling Yodeler, is a 4-cost 3 attack 4 HP undead minion for both Hunter and Death Knight that has the battle cry, trigger a friendly minion's death rattle twice. So currently in standard rotation, there aren't really any death rattles that you want to copy in Hunter. However, in Death Knight in particular, there are quite a few possible choices that you could make with a card like this. The first thing that comes to mind is Cagehead. Another trigger for Cagehead makes that deck a little bit more relevant. It also does allow you to run a non-pure Death Knight list, which is actually incredibly interesting since most of the Death Knight lists we've seen so far are mainly reliant on only having one rune type. This card definitely helps a 2 unholy 1 blood deck by quite a bit. The other thing worth mentioning here is, while you can use it for Cagehead, there are some wacky combos that you could do with it, such as using Shellfish in Death Knight, where you're going to use Death Growl in order to duplicate the Death Rattle there, and then you just double it even more with a card like this. The other possibility, in theory, you could use this in combination with Freebird and Deathbringer Sarfang in order to double the death rattle onto the Freebirds and get additional copies there. There's just a lot of possibilities, and honestly, out of all the cards revealed so far, this is probably one of my favorites. Now for the next card, which is going to be Hidden Meaning, a 2-cost secret for Hunter that when your opponent ends their turn with 0 mana, summon a random 3-cost minion. I don't think this is exactly what Secret Hunter really needed. However, it is kind of funny that this does show the hidden meaning behind having the Soulless in the main set that Hunter got access to, as now we do have a secret to go along with the secret support. The most interesting thing about this card, though, in particular, is the fact that you could combo this with the Elite Tauren Champion in order to make sure your opponent always ends on 0 mana, and thus giving you a 3-cost minion every time you do. But I don't know if that style of Hunter deck is going to be the most popular. I think this card will probably be one that you just discover off of other cards and other classes, and honestly not be something that you run in Hunter by itself. All right, let's get on to the remaining of the Death Knight cards. The first one is going to be Dead Air, a 2-cost 1 frost 1 unholy rune card that destroys your undead minions, resummoning them all. So while I don't think this card is probably going to be run in a rainbow Death Knight list, I do think this does have the possibility of opening up Cagehead Death Knight to being 1 frost and 2 unholy instead of 1 blood and 2 unholy. While I might have been focusing on mill DK in the earlier parts of the video, I do think that mine DK is also a possibility, using Naval Mine to do a bunch of damage to your opponent's face and then OTKing them through that. Now that we have a card like this, it will allow us to easily trigger all the death rattles that we spread through things like Death Growl. We do have a lot of really powerful death rattles that Dead Air could, in theory, just instantly trigger. Only downside about this card in particular is the fact that you can't run 3 of the same rune type, but it does look like Blizzard is maybe trying to shift away from that, because a lot of those decks are very polarizing in how you play against them and very frustrating to play against. And I can't wait to see a world where we might see some more rainbow variants, purple or teal Death Knight actually come into fruition, because there's a lot of design space there. Now for the next card, which is going to be Cold Feet, a 2-cost frost spell for Death Knight and Paladin that increases the cost of enemy minions next turn by 5. Holy shit, is this card good for control strategies, and Death Knight and Paladin both have control decks in the meta, so I do think this card will probably see a lot of play. It also does work pretty well in a aggro deck, weirdly enough, because this could prevent your opponent from playing down a bunch of minions if you're playing against an aggro matchup yourself. But truth be told, I really expect this to see a lot of play in control strategies instead of an aggro strategy, as this does allow you to control the board state for only 2 mana and does prevent your opponent from doing a huge swing turn, a deck that relies heavily on minions. There's just a lot of flexibility with a card like this, and the fact that we've seen a new Lotheb also be rotated in the same mini set, I do think both of these cards are going to be quite deadly in combination with each other. Now for the next card, which is going to be Cool Ghoul, a 4-cost 3 attack 1 HP undead minion with Divine Shield Reborn. It's a Paladin and Death Knight card. Man, this card is going to be incredibly annoying to actually deal with. It's essentially going to require you to either attack into it 4 times, or at a bare minimum require you to use 2 removals against this unless you have some type of silence. It's another Divine Shield minion for Paladin, which means it's going to be strong there. Given the fact of how hard it's going to be to remove from the board, I can't see a world where this doesn't see some play. It also does introduce another tribe that Paladin doesn't really have too much access to, which is undead. So you could easily draw this off of something like the Curator, and thus allowing you to go more down a menagerie route in a pure Paladin deck. And speaking of Paladin, we should go over the remaining cards. Horn of the Wind Lord is a 6-cost weapon with 3 attack, 4 durability. 1 Fury, whenever your hero attacks a minion, set its stats to 3/3. This is a Paladin Shaman card that will probably act as removal for 2 minions on your opponent's board each time you attack with it on the turn you place it down. However, if you're going to be a little bit greedy with it, I think there's either 2 or 3 cards that will actually increase your hero's attack, and if you use this in combination with that, you may or may not be able to actually OTK your opponent in Paladin. I can't remember right now if Shaman has any cards that increase their hero's attack currently in rotation, but you never know. One of the other classes that Shaman could be paired up with could run attack gain cards, and thus allowing you to attack gain in that. This is very comparable to Doom Hammer in Shaman, however it doesn't overload you, which makes it a little bit better and can act as removal. I actually don't think Blizzard is expecting people to try to OTK with this card, but that is going to be an incredibly fun deck to try out, especially given the fact that that's a style of Paladin deck that we've never really seen. Now for the next card, which is going to be Jukebox Totem, a 2-cost 0 attack 4 HP mech totem that at the end of your turn summon a 1/1 Silverhand Recruit. It's both a Paladin and Shaman card. This is another card that feeds into Curator, which is actually kind of interesting if you think about it. We now have, I think, almost every single tribe in Paladin, so you can almost always guarantee the fact that you're going to draw an insane amount of cards. This also does prove they learn from the caravans, where it happens at the end of the turn instead of at the beginning of your next turn, which makes it a little bit more playable there. In Shaman, it allows you to swarm the board, even though you don't really have too much synergy with Silverhand Recruits. But in Paladin, there are quite a few cards right now in rotation that will allow you to get the most advantage off of those Silverhand Recruits that you summon at the end of the turn. The fact that it is only 2 mana and has a HP pool of 4 instead of 3 makes this card incredibly playable, as a lot of removal only does 3 damage compared to 4. Now for the last card revealed today, Dance Floor, which is a 2-cost 2 durability location that gives your minions rush. Hey, it's Broomstick all over again in Paladin. Man, that didn't go wrong the first time around that we had access to that. I get why Demolition Renovator actually got buffed up now. This card is incredibly broken. I can't see a world where this doesn't see some play in either a control style Paladin deck or maybe even an aggro Paladin. This is basically easier to use Lady Leandrin without having to actually buffer up to get the Rush and Divine Shield synergy off of her. In most of the current Paladin archetypes, Big Paladin using Angar and a bunch of those type of cards makes this card way better, as this will allow you to set up those turns way easier. And I think that will probably push that style of deck a little bit over the top, where it'll probably make it where pure Paladin isn't going to be the top Paladin deck any longer. I can't wait for a world where that statement is actually true, because man oh man, am I sick and tired of seeing pure Paladin. So let me know down below what cards that you're most looking forward to using. I'm really looking forward to trying out maybe Meal Death Knight or a attack gain Paladin deck. Those two decks seem very, very funny, and I can't wait to try them both out. But like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.